And if you like the video or any other content on the channel, feel free to subscribe. This video is going over the Adeptus Custodes Talons of the Emperor Detachment. How the change to strategic mastery has helped and hurt the detachment. How the change to devastating wounds benefits this detachment. I go over the detachment rule and every enhancement and stratagem in detail, give some general advice on when and how to use these stratagems, then some final thoughts and a few key units for the Talons of the Emperor. We'll quickly go over the army rule and the detachment rule. For the army rule, we have the martial kata. Each time a unit in your army with this ability is selected to fight, select one of the kata stances. Until that unit has finished making its attacks, the selected stance is active for it and it gains the relevant ability. Dakatari stance, melee weapons equipped by models in this unit have the sustained hits 1 ability. Rendak stance, melee weapons equipped by models in this unit have the lethal hits ability. A great army rule to boost our melee damage potential: if we'll be wounding on a 4+ or less, pick sustained 1. If it's 5 or 6s, pick lethal hits. Then we have the detachment rule called the Revered Companions, and this has 2 different parts. Psychonic units from your army gain the following ability: Null Aegis. While an Adeptus Custodes unit is within 6 inches of this model, models in that unit have the 5+ feel no pain against psychic attacks and mortal wounds. All other Adeptus Custodes units from your army gain the following ability: Deadly Unity. While a Psychonic unit is within 6 inches of this unit, each time a model in that Psychonic unit makes an attack, add 1 to the hit roll. And for these 2 different parts, for the Null Aegis, a 5+ feel no pain to mortal wounds will help our army survivability, with a stratagem to increase it to a 4+ feel no pain to those mortal wounds. Having to be within 6 inches of the Psychonic unit to access the Null Aegis aura is still the weakness of this detachment rule though. For Deadly Unity, the +1 to hit will not benefit the Witch Seekers. It will, however, benefit the Prosecutors with their Bolters. The Vigilators love +1 to hit on their Great Blades. Now we'll go over the enhancements for the Talons of the Emperor. The first one we have, and probably my favorite, is Aegis Projector. Adeptus Custodes model only. Once per turn, the first time a saving throw is failed for the bearer's unit, change the damage characteristic of that attack to 0. This is my favorite enhancement in the detachment. Like I said, Radiant Mantle has the potential to mitigate more damage, but I'm not a huge fan of the be within 12 inches for Radiant Mantle. Even so, if the opponent uses a 1 damage weapon to try to fish out the first failed save, since this is every player turn, that is a potential 10 damage we could mitigate with this enhancement. The chances are it will be even more than 10 by the end of the game. A shield captain attached to Custodian Wardens is a perfect target for this enhancement. And speaking of Radiant Mantle, we might as well do that one next. Adeptus Custodes model only. Each time an attack targets the bearer's unit, if the attacking model is within 12 inches, subtract 1 from the hit roll. Another great defensive enhancement: -1 to the hit against ranged and melee attacks. The downside is that the attacking model needs to be within 12 inches for the -1 to hit to take effect, making it much less effective against ranged attacks. I do like to put this on a character model, a unit that will be trying to get up close and personal with the opponent's army. I would rather Aegis Projector on a character unit that I want to be holding onto an objective instead of Radiant Mantle though. Next we have Gift of the Terran Artifice. Adeptus Custodes model only. Each time a bearer makes a melee attack, add 1 to the wound roll. +1 to the wound roll is a simple but effective enhancement for a primarily melee army. I do like to put this on a blade champion if I have a blade champion in the list. I do prefer one of the defensive enhancements like Radiant Mantle or Aegis Projector before I consider this Gift of the Terran Artifice enhancement. Now on to the last and probably the weakest of the enhancements, we have Champion of the Imperium. Adeptus Custodes model only. The range of the bearer's Null Aegis or Deadly Unity ability is increased to 9 inches. This enhancement isn't that strong. It adds an extra 3 inches to the Revered Companions detachment ability, which gives you the Null Aegis or Deadly Unity. I'm probably not going to pick this enhancement, either Aegis Projector or Radiant Mantle for defense. Gift of the Terran Artifice if we want a little bit more damage to our army. Sadly, right now, I'm probably not going to consider this enhancement in many of my lists. Now on to the stratagems, and we might as well start with a banger, the Talon Pincer. For 1 CP, opponent's movement phase, just after an enemy unit ends a normal, advance, or fallback move. Up to 2 Adeptus Custodes unit from your army that are within 9 inches of that enemy unit, your units can make a normal move up to 6 inches. The restrictions for this one, and this is going to be a theme, you cannot select units that are within engagement range of one or more enemy units. You can only select 2 units if one and only one of them is a Psychona unit, and both are within 6 inches of each other. This is the most important stratagem in the detachment to mitigate damage. To be honest, it is one of the few that we have to mitigate damage on our Custodes models. Psychona units have the Shield of Honor to help protect them from enemy attacks, but the Custodes models, once we're kind of in combat or once we're kind of get some line of sight on us, there's not a lot we can do to mitigate damage. Index Custodes had an almost auto-include enhancement that gave us a once per game react to move, and the Talons of the Emperor, we can react to move any one Adeptus Custodes unit in our army every opponent's movement phase. Very powerful. We can use this to either make charges much harder or use it to move 6 inches and out of line of sight from enemy ranged attacks. Just for an example, you may move behind a ruin, avoiding most if not all the enemy shooting. Another thing we can do is use it aggressively to either steal objectives, get into enemy deployment, or even to block some movement or a future charge. This is the stratagem we need to consider every battle round if we want to use this or need to use this with the Shield Captain's Strategic Mastery. Next up is Hunt as 1. For 1 CP, start of your movement phase, up to 2 Adeptus Custodes unit from your army. Until the end of the turn, your units are eligible to shoot or declare a charge in the turn in which they fell back. With the usual restriction, you can only select 2 units if one and only one of them is a Psychona unit and both are within 6 inches of each other. Our Custodes love having access to fallback, shoot, and charge. It makes it much more dangerous to charge into our units, especially Wardens who have not used the 4+ Feel No Pain. If we get charged and we survive, we can fall back, shoot, and charge to get fights first instead of the opponent activating first in the ongoing combat of the next turn. It gives us options to charge into other units if the unit we are engaged with is a bit unfavorable. We can also fall back to perform secondary actions for points if need be as well. With the June 2024 Dataslate change, we can now use this for 0 CP with a Shield Captain. This is one of the better targets for the Strategic Mastery, especially when we have 0 CP and need the Shield Captain's unit to survive to do an action close by or maybe charge into another important unit. But like I said, we do need to keep in mind with the reactive movement stratagem, you always want to make sure you have the CP for that one because it is a very powerful stratagem. The next stratagem went from being very situational to probably being used a fair amount during a game. For Shield of Honor, for 1 CP, your opponent's shooting phase just after an enemy unit has selected its targets, 1 Psychona infantry unit from your army that was selected as a target of one or more of the attacking unit's attacks, and 1 other friendly Adeptus Custodes infantry unit, excluding Psychona units, within 6 inches of that Psychona infantry unit. Until the end of the phase, any attack that targets your Psychona unit must instead target your other Adeptus Custodes unit, unless it is not an eligible target. With the change to Devastating Wounds, allowing our detachment rule to give us protection, this stratagem becomes much more important. We want to have a few Sisters units spread throughout our army. Having a way to protect them besides smart movement and positioning will be a great tool in our toolbox. We can use this stratagem with some Wardens and Vigilators with Alea to make a very nasty, hard to deal with combination. Unless it is a Psychona unit we really want to protect like the Vigilators and Alea unit, we probably do not want to use a Shield Captain to make this stratagem cost 0 CP. With so many good stratagems in the detachment, which one to use with Strategic Mastery will be a difficult choice at times. Then we have Empiric Severance. For 1 CP, your opponent's shooting phase or the fight phase just after an enemy unit has selected its targets. 1 Adeptus Custodes unit from your army that was selected as a target of one or more of the attacking unit's attacks, and 1 friendly Psychona unit within 6 inches of the Adeptus Custodes unit. To the end of the phase, your unit has the Feel No Pain 4 ability against psychic attacks and mortal wounds. This is a great way to help against an incoming attack that has a lot of mortal wounds potential, taking our 5+ Feel No Pain to a 4+. We can only use this once per enemy shooting phase or in the fight phase, making us have to decide between which units to use this on and try to figure out whether potential incoming mortal wounds is worth the 1 CP. We need to be within 6 inches of the Psychona unit to be able to use this stratagem, meaning we will already have access to the 5+ to the mortal wounds from the detachment rule. We do not want to use Empiric Severance on an incoming grenade stratagem when there's a big flamer unit on the board with access to mortal wounds that has yet to shoot this phase. Do not let the opponent bait this stratagem out of us, especially when it is really needed on a certain enemy attack later on in the phase. And on to the next stratagem, and there's another theme in this detachment as well, is all these stratagems are really good, or at least usable. So the next one, Emperor's Executioners. At the start of the fight phase, this one does cost 2 CP. At the start of the fight phase, up to 2 Adeptus Custodes units from your army. Until the end of the fight phase, each time a model in one of your units targets an enemy unit that is below starting strength, add 1 to the wound roll. The restrictions, you can only select 2 units if one and only one of them is a Psychona unit and both are within 6 inches of each other. 2 CP is a bit expensive, which makes this stratagem worth considering when using a shield captain's strategic mastery. +1 to wound is very powerful for a hard-hitting melee army. Anything below strength 7 will be wounding on 2s, and then most vehicles we're going to be wounding on 4s instead of the usual 5s. Custodian Wardens and Alaris synergize with this stratagem quite well, giving the usual less threatening Wardens an extra punch. The Alaris with +1 to wound in combat is a threat to any enemy unit in the game. Alaris are able to take units they plan on charging to below starting strength with all of their shooting, much easier than Custodian Wardens or Guard. This is a great stratagem, but it will not work on a full strength unit. And our last stratagem for the Talons of the Emperor is Talons Interlocked. Your shooting phase, up to 2 Adeptus Custodes infantry units from your army and 1 enemy unit that is an eligible target for all of those units. Until the end of the phase, your units can only target that enemy unit, but each time a model in one of your units make a ranged attack, improve the strength and armor penetration characteristics of that attack by 1. The normal restrictions of you can only select 2 units if one of them is a Psychona unit within 6 inches of each other. With this being locked to infantry only, there's only a few units I would use this on a regular basis with. With this being locked to infantry only, there's only a few units I would use this stratagem on a regular basis without feeling like I'm spending CP just to spend it. +1 to strength and +1 to AP can be very deadly in certain units shooting certain targets. The Custodian Guard and the Sagittarium are worth considering the stratagem with. Not the most ideal targets, but better than say Wardens or Venatari. The best infantry unit to use this stratagem on would be the Alaris Terminators. They have far more potential attacks than any other of our infantry units, with the Slayer of Tyrants data sheet ability giving them reroll wounds if shooting a character or monster vehicle unit. Shooting a low toughness character unit combined with the stratagem, the Alaris can do some serious work into those targets. Let's end the video with some final thoughts on the Talons of the Emperor detachment. The Talons of the Emperor are more powerful than before the Dataslate, just not as much of a power boost as say the Shield Host or the Auric Champions, which was to be expected since Talons was by far the most powerful detachment when the Codex was released. Losing access to being able to use some of these very strong stratagems like Talon Pincer for the reactive movement or Emperor's Champions for the +1 to wound twice per phase, and for the Emperor's Executioners making the 2 CP cost entirely free, and because doubling up on the reactive move was quite strong, so losing access to that does probably bring down the power of this detachment a little bit because there was so many powerful battle tactics. But this was a great change for the game overall. I think this detachment does like to have some range support more than the other detachment. This detachment lacks the raw melee damage output needed to counter the large defensive nerf compared to our old Index Custodes. We need to play a bit more cagey, pick our battles in this detachment. If we get out of position or caught in too many unfavorable battles, our army will crumble. We do not have a lot of options besides our data sheets to help us once the enemy has swarmed on us and gone into combat. A Caladius grab tank or 2 would help to keep the opponents from deploying too aggressively or having their guns out in the best shot lanes for the entire game. We want to make the enemy have multiple choices, not just one clear-cut best option of what they're going to do in their turn. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. Thanks for stopping by.